Welcome to Life Isn't Lived on a Spreadsheet with Ryan Poterack from Poterack Capital Advisory. You have unique values, objectives, fears, life experiences, and biases. Any financial professional who ignores or minimizes the importance of your story may not be able to help you achieve your ideal outcomes or hit your goals. It's time to experience the PCA difference. In this podcast, we help business executives, soon-to-be retirees, and solutions-based individuals overcome the anxiety leading up to their upcoming years. We do this by initiating in-depth discussions about the financial aspects of retirement, like tax planning and asset allocation, alongside, and often overlooked, personal and lifestyle aspects. Join us for this journey where we explore retirement from a contrarian point of view, as Ryan draws from years of experience and qualified guest professionals to help you explore the true purpose of your money in retirement and the impact you want to make in your golden years. Investment advice offered through Private Advisor Group, a registered investment advisor. Private Advisor Group and Poterack Capital Advisory are separate entities. This information is not intended to be a substitute for individualized legal or tax advice. Please consult your legal or tax advisor regarding your specific situation.
It's your money right now. But once you depart this world, who will be in charge of it then? Have you prepared them on what to expect, where to find important documents, and which professionals they should contact? Although it can be uncomfortable and even awkward at times, maybe your money is something you should talk about before it's too late. I'm Patrice Sikora with your host, Ryan Poterack. Now, Ryan, this can be an emotionally charged issue. So how would you suggest people start the conversation?
Well, hello, Patrice. And yeah, you certainly put your thumb on it. Anytime, it's not something people like to think about a lot,
No.
but when people die, there's going to be emotion. There's going to be people that might feel that they had words unsaid or didn't get the last hug, or, I'm glad the son of a gun is gone. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff, but the one consistent thread is that there's likely to be emotion at that time and for weeks and months, if not years, going forward. Yet there are really a significant number of decisions and actions that have to take place. And the more wealthy a situation is in a family, the more that has to be done, because the estate might be more complicated, more emotion. It can be, and a lot of, we're going to talk about how to address these issues. So I'll turn it back over to you, Patrice.
But the big question is, how do you start the conversation? I mean, really, you sit the kids down, you say, well, I'm going to die, so this is what you're going to get.
You do have a natural dynamic where, so I'll refer to like mom and dad and then kids throughout. And to the parents, quite naturally, they don't want to contemplate their demise. It's not a pleasant conversation. At times when families naturally get together around holidays and birthdays, these are times of joy, typically. And with adult kids who might live all over the country and such and have their own responsibilities, it can be somewhat rare where all the family gets together. And from the parent standpoint, committing time to talk about, hey, when I'm dead and gone, here's how to handle things. So there's just a natural avoidance of that. Logically, intellectually, I believe that mom and dad know that would make sense. It's just uncomfortable to bring up. And then on the flip side, the adult children, for them to bring it up, they don't want to be perceived as vultures, for lack of a better. And so I would say that the adult children avoid the conversation even more with their parents, but they typically, if it's a close family, the siblings will be talking to each other about it. Just, hey, I saw mom the other day and boy, she's not looking all that great. Or, hey, do you know if they've done any planning? So they have these conversations going on in a silo, a parent silo and a children's siblings silo. So where to start? I mean, for me, I'm an advocate of getting into these conversations. So I'm also a facilitator. Because I don't know if it would occur to either party naturally to bring it up. If mom and dad have, let's say they have all of their ducks in a row, they've got wills, trusts, if it's applicable, powers of, they got everything perfect. Well, in their mind, they can often think, well, we've got everything perfect. Everything's set up for our kids. It's going to be smooth as smooth can be. So therefore, why have the uncomfortable situation? They've already worked with a great attorney, et cetera. But at the same time, the challenge is, and we'll dig into this, is if the children are completely unaware of the planning and their responsibilities that are documented in the estate planning documents, the wills, the trust, the powers of attorney, that can really catch people off guard. With the parents not around, they can wonder, well, why did they choose John instead of choosing me?
Exactly.
So it can go a lot of different ways where just words on paper do not add context. After when these documents are relevant, mom or dad are no longer around.
So is it really on the parents to bring this up?
I think that I'd give at least a 60-40 weighting on the responsibility of the parents to bring it up. And I would come at it from this standpoint. So the parents have built up their wealth and whatever assets those are to whatever amount that they are. Being a good steward of their own wealth in making sure that their own wishes are carried out as they themselves would want. Now that can be give it all to charity, it can be whatever planning they want. But when they die, they can no longer do anything. So I think the parents, to get the planning right, is on them. But if it involves a transfer to their children, which is where the focus of today's discussion is, then I think it's more the parents' responsibility to make sure that that's set up to happen as they wish, which means their documents need to be perfect. But I also think, assuming that they would not want their wealth being passed on to cause unnecessary emotion, strife, and conflict, that's where initiating the conversation with their children, so it's not some kind of a big surprise to any of the children as to how things were to play out.
Is there a role for the wealth manager in here?
I think so. And I do think it's in the facilitator. So as the messenger, I'm in neither camp, so to speak. So I can ask the questions that I know are on the children's minds and some of the pros and cons of different strategies. But this is also why mom and dad chose it. So I can articulate their position. And I think it just both ways, it comes off a little bit softer because I can also probably more readily communicate the rationale why mom and dad wanted this, what their intentions were, without coming across as, I'm in a particular camp. It's just I'm the objective third party in that regard. And also, I've always thought about it this way, is the numbers don't matter as much as the structure and who's responsible for what. So if we have 3 children that are intended to be heirs, whether there's $500,000 to be inherited or 5 million or 10 million, it's really about, okay, let's just say hypothetically, 1/3 of your parents' wealth is allotted to each of you 3. One of you were to happen to predecease your mom and dad, your 1/3 would go to your children. They've also had to choose an executor or a trustee, and they've chosen John. I'll tell you from experience, typically the parents will choose the oldest. All other things being equal, it's just kind of the way they do it. But let's say, if I'm communicating this to the kids, it's important that your parents in their estate planning choose an executor or a trustee, and they've chosen John. Now, that doesn't mean that John's share is any larger. Actually, what it means is he has the responsibility to put the work in and the time in to make sure that your parents' estate planning documents are carried out as they wished. Now, separately, the parents may have chosen co-executors, co-trustees. All of that is fine. Now, with 3 kids, if all of them were, let's say, co-executors or co-trustees, and I'm using that somewhat interchangeably, an executor who is in charge of carrying out the will. But if a family has a trust, then the trustee is the language for the person that is has the responsibility of carrying out the terms of the trust.
Mm-hmm.
But if there's all three children are co-trustees, that can work fantastic if all three get along. The parents could put a provision in there, hey, 2 out of 3 votes win. But I will tell you, with 2 kids and having co-trustees, these are some of the issues that the parents would have already worked through themselves, and why they made certain choices. Maybe it was just John's in charge, then it's Jennifer or whatever. Getting into this conversation would be after the parents have already gone through this, and this is the way they wanted, and it wouldn't be without some thought process. I would be in the loop on that thought process due to the comprehensive, holistic nature of my practice. And then it's really conveying, here's how things will work. John, Jennifer, and Brenda, as an example. Hopefully I'll remember those names if I use the story again in this podcast. But the other thing that I found in I guess in real time having these conversations is this is a conversation that the children have wanted to be in for a long time, because it's been kind of mysterious. And so they tend to appreciate, okay, phew, I know my parents have done planning. Okay, I know they're working with professionals. They use an attorney. Their wealth manager or their advisor seems to all be operating in our parents' best interest. And so the I guess the culture of the conversation seems to be healthy, which leads to, if any of the children have an in the moment disagreement with their parents, it takes some chutzpah, so to speak, to engage with that.
But at least the parents are still there, so
Yep.
they can take that issue, that chutzpah, that
Yes.
the conflict. They can take it to them and say, "I don't understand. What was your thinking?"
Yes. As I mentioned earlier, Patrice, I'm not in anybody's camp per se, but I have knowledge in this area. So if as I'm listening and facilitating, if I feel that something that the parents have said or I've said the first time that was maybe misunderstood or mischaracterized in one of the children's mind, we can clarify that in the moment. And having a facilitator like me in this case, it opens up this topic to where a subsequent conversation, one of the children decides they want to talk to mom and dad alone or whatever, it's much easier to follow that up. But as I was touching on, what I've seen cause problems is in terms of the structure of the planning and who has what responsibility, as opposed to typically the actual wealth division is equally, unless there's special needs, unless there's maybe some drug or alcohol issues, that sort of thing. Also, it's not unusual for parents in this case, to want to give to their church or their charities and that sort of thing. And I will definitely stand up for if I sense a child in the conversation who might want the money themselves. I mean, I'm a fairly straightforward, candid person, but that message can get across without me denigrating the person. But there's a reason why people give to charities, because it's meaningful to them. So I typically would say something like, your parents have worked long and hard to create this wealth, and really it's wherever they want that wealth to go. They can't take it with them. It is their desire to do that. And what's important for each of you, John, Jennifer, and Brenda, to know that they have also gone the extra mile to make sure, working with their attorney, working with me, to make sure they have plans that are unambiguous when the time comes. And today they wanted to share that clarity with you in advance. So there's nothing gray, or at least minimizing any potential gray at a time that could be quite emotional for the family.
On a more positive note, perhaps, maybe they want to accelerate their gifting. Maybe the parents want to give the kids some of the money now. What kind of response do you get to that?
Yeah, and it's something that I encourage, Patrice, that in saying over and over to parents, You can't take it with you. Your current estate planning says that each of your three kids get it equally. Wouldn't it be nice if you were actually able to see the smile on their face, or have a shared experience with a vacation or something like that, as opposed to after you pass away, them getting all that money? And that all last few sentences seems entirely illogical to me, but it's just something about the people who created the money, the parents in this case, or the wealth generally. And throughout their life, it was almost a way of keeping score, is building up wealth in part so they could retire. And to see those numbers shrink, because which they have to, if they start giving it away, it just is not as easy as I would logically expect. Because yes, once they realize they're not going to spend all of their money, they're never going to get to zero. I would think go ahead and gifting would make a lot of sense. It just doesn't happen as often as you would think. It's actually pretty rare.
Which also brings up the question, do you share the real numbers with your children?
Well, that's secondary for me. Really depends. What I've seen in, over 3 decades, and as I think I was fortunate to have, my 4 grandparents lived pretty long life, which eat with each subsequent generation. I'm 57. So my grandparents that lived into their 80s and 90s, but they also were Depression era.
Mm-hmm.
They were more tight to the vest than, say, my parents, who are 81, both of them, and alive and well. They're tighter to the vest than, for example, I am. So I think that's changed. The willingness to communicate openly about this topic, to include the numbers, has shifted. But again, I'm generalizing. Family to family, it can be different. But the individual numbers, I don't think that's really a conversation that has to happen with the kids.
Okay.
The parents need to come to the realization of, okay, let's give everybody 10 grand this Christmas just to surprise them. They've kind of already come to that number. They probably spent time talking with me. Hey, Ryan, is this a good number? And I probably told them you could do 3 times that. But yes, if that's the number, that's the number. But if you're on the receiving end of whatever the number is, gosh, I mean, all there can be is gratitude and love, I would think.
You would hope. Yeah.
Yep.
What are some common mistakes that you've seen?
Well, consistent with this conversation is not communicating. So
Right.
I've seen there's a lot of really smart, intelligent people in this world that don't know what an executor is or does, and don't necessarily know how, having real estate in multiple states and can cause hassle and expense. And so not being familiar with the process of probate or settling an estate, particularly in the age of online everything.
Mm-hmm.
If any of us in the audience can think about how many websites, how many accounts that you have that have username and passwords, and they may vary. Well, okay, all of a sudden you fall over and die. Who has those? Trying to untangle that. And it really has to be untangled, can be extremely frustrating for somebody who's, I don't know, they're in other occupations and they just don't understand how this area of the legal system works. So that's where I think it can be much less of a burden if they have some sense in advance. Because I will tell you, there's a lot of situations where adult kids have no idea who their parents' wealth manager is, or financial advisor, or who their attorney is. That's not unusual. So I just sort back to, not to oversimplify, but lack of communication is where all the mistakes happen. Not updating, keeping documents up to date, not having beneficiaries up to date. That can bring about some real shockers too.
Yeah, that's another podcast in itself. You mentioned the executor, and let's go with the power of attorney, whoever has that as well. They may not know what the title means, what the responsibilities are. How do you let them know, oh, you're in for I need you to do this for me when I'm gone?
Well, so and actually the power of attorney, there's two of them. One is called a durable power of attorney that in English really is more the financial power of attorney. And then there's the healthcare power of attorney. And actually, these are the two documents that are relevant while the person is alive. Well, the will and trust is after you're dead and gone. These powers of attorney is, so let's say John is the financial power of attorney for his parents. Well, when John he's still alive, but he's incapacitated. He has Alzheimer's, let's say, or Parkinson's or some horrible disease where he's no longer capable of making his own decisions. Then John, as the financial power of attorney, would be able to write checks on John's behalf. As an example, would be able to adjust the portfolio with John's financial advisor. He's basically acting on behalf of his father. Mm-hmm. He doesn't have control of the money for his own uses. So sometimes people will choose a financial power of attorney amongst the children who might be more familiar with those matters. Now, the healthcare power of attorney may be a different person, but it is assigning. So I'll just stick with the dad. So the dad, and let's say that the mom is predeceased John. So John's the last parent in both these cases. So John might choose Jennifer as the healthcare power of attorney because while John is very familiar with, financial issues and all that, he lives in, Seattle, and his father John is in Florida, and Jennifer happens to live fairly close in Florida because healthcare decisions can be a little bit more urgent. Maybe let's say Jennifer is a nurse. She has a better understanding of the issues within healthcare decisions, hospital, that sort of stuff, but it is giving Jennifer the ability as the healthcare power of attorney to talk directly to the doctor about alternative forms of treatment for her father, John, and releasing of information and all those kinds of things. So both powers of attorney are who is going to represent you when you are still alive, but incapable of representing yourself.
That's a great way of putting it. An excellent explanation. Now, the executor or executrix, perhaps it's the woman.
Yep. Oftentimes, the financial power of attorney matches up with the executor because the financial power of attorney is given the authority to handle many of the things that the executor or executrix would handle. It's just in one case, the person is incapacitated. In the other case, the person is deceased.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Now, it also could be, Patrice, though, proximity, just to use that as an example, is, okay, John lives in Florida. John's out in Seattle. Jennifer might be named as the executrix just because handling a lot of the stuff
she's
locally.
there.
Yeah, checking savings account, all that kind of stuff, putting the house up for sale, so that would be another element.
Oh, what can we give Brenda to do?
Well, Brenda was the youngest. She was always coddled, always the family favorite and such. So Brenda's just supporting John and Jennifer throughout this whole process. So.
What about the professional team here? When should they be brought in? When should they be introduced to the kids? I mean, I would hope it'd be before the parents' demise.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is sooner versus later, and it really depends on their role. In my particular industry, not all advisors are the same, and that's not meaning good to bad, bad to good. But if their financial advisor is really an investment manager exclusively, they might themselves have no knowledge of the estate planning and the assets and the taxes and all that kind of stuff. But advisors who work similarly to me in terms of being holistic, I'm constantly bringing up the topic of speaking to the children, and typically I've worked with their attorney that they have chosen, or I've referred an attorney, and that would also possibly go with a CPA or tax preparer. So it becomes a team for the parents, but that I will tell you is much less common than common to have that. But for parents who have that team, I think sooner than later in introducing the kids, we end up working with a lot of parents, children, and adult grandchildren quite naturally because they have had that kind of conversation.
Then there's a continuity to it as well.
Yes. and everybody's served by it. I mean, the parents are served by, in effect, somewhat mentoring their children in all of these responsible issues. I would say that the children they have parents that are very aware of the importance of financial planning, using professionals, estate planning, all of this. I would say is more likely that the children will pursue that at a younger age, which is healthy. And then also from the wealth manager or financial advisors, retaining those assets and relationships is good business for me in this example, as opposed to seeing those assets that I've helped manage with the parents for 20 years walk out the door, considering how difficult it is to foster new relationships in this relationship. So everybody wins, I would say.
I would think so, definitely too. And like I say, the continuity is there. The parents have peace of mind. Even whoever is chosen as executor or has the power of attorney, whichever one it is,
yep,
they have some peace of mind. They understand that you know mom and dad. You know why things were done such and such a way.
Yeah. Yep. And it's recent situation. And it seems like a few times every year where one parent dies first. Statistically, it ends up being the husband first. Mm-hmm. Of the generation that's retired, husbands tend to have more interest in this stuff. So now I have the widow, and then there's adult children that have mom's best interest at heart that may not know me. And so that's always kind of, I don't know how that's going to play out. When I go meet with mom and the adult children, there's a dynamic there that can be kind of interesting. Because they don't know me, they don't have a relationship with me. All they know is that mom and dad worked with me for a lot of years, which does carry weight, but they have their own advisor possibly, or even amongst multiple siblings, there can be a difference between siblings on need for the money, or opinions on how the money should be managed and spent. And again, that's at a time of high emotion, and those are not my most fun meetings and discussions. I love when they go well, but sometimes they don't go as everybody would hope.
Wow. Have you seen families pull apart?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, yes. I remember, 15 years ago, maybe, the husband and wife, and so I was asking about relationships. I always want to know when I'm early on with clients and their relationships with their parents, siblings, and all that kind of stuff. And one of the reasons that this couple, and they were retired, this couple wanted to make sure their estate planning was perfect, is because the wife's parents' estate planning was not perfect, and it caused conflict between the wife that was sitting in front of me and her sister, where they had not spoken in years. And so she's in my conference room, she's tearing up, and that was part of the motivation to review everything and make sure everything was perfect. And so, yes, I've seen similar situations. There's just, again, the emotion of the time, but once the parents are gone, the wealth is still there, and money, everybody wants more.
Yeah.
And so some siblings want their more to be more than their more. So that can be a dynamic.
This was a really insightful episode, Ryan. I appreciate it. Is there something we did not touch on that you want to make sure does get mentioned?
It's probably also already implicit in the words that I've said, but tomorrow's not promised to anybody. And when somebody dies, the world stops, their world stops. And if you don't, in our audience, currently have a plan, let alone communicating that plan to the people you have named in that plan, the government already has one for you. So I would encourage you, while you might not want to think about this topic, and get your estate planning documents in order. Again, if you don't, the government will decide a lot of this. And if you get them in order, take that extra step and communicate to the loved ones that you've named in those documents. It can only be a positive.
How can people reach you, Ryan?
Well, they can always go to our website, www.poterack.net. That's POTERACK.net. They can call our phone number at 704-366-5776. That's 704-366-5776. And of course, we're out there on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. We appreciate everybody tuning into the podcast. We also do virtual events every month if you're interested in sitting in on one of those.
As for the podcast, don't miss an episode of Life Isn't Lived on a Spreadsheet. All you have to do, follow or subscribe, share with friends, colleagues, and yes, especially family. And thanks for being with us.
Thank you for listening to Life Isn't Lived on a Spreadsheet. Click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. To ask questions about topics covered during the show or get a copy of Making It Count, Life Isn't Lived on a Spreadsheet by Ryan Poterack, visit www.poterack.net or give us a call at 704-366-5776. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Poterack Capital Advisory. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning. Poterack Capital Advisory does not offer legal or tax advice. Please consult the appropriate professional regarding your individual circumstances. Nothing contained herein is to be considered a solicitation, research material, an investment recommendation, or advice of any kind. The information contained herein may contain information that is subject to change without notice. Any investments or strategies referenced herein do not take into account the investment objectives, financial situation, or particular needs of any specific person.
Product sustainability must be independently determined for each individual investor. Poterack Capital Advisory explicitly disclaims any responsibility for product suitability or suitability determinations related to individual investors.